The waves crashed endlessly against the black rocks beneath the fortress prison. Deep inside the stone walls, where sunlight never reached and hope rarely survived, Edmond Dantes sat alone in his narrow cell. It had been 12 years since he had been arrested. 12 years since he had seen the face of Mercedes. 12 years since he had walked freely beneath the open sky. At first, Edmund had counted every day, then every week, then every year. Eventually, the numbers lost meaning. The prison had become his entire world. His hair had grown long and rough. His face carried the marks of suffering. Some days he spoke aloud simply to hear a human voice. The jailers rarely answered. To them, he was no longer a man. He was merely prisoner 34. That evening, Edmund lay on the cold floor staring at the ceiling when he heard a faint sound. Scratch. He sat upright. The noise stopped. Perhaps it was a rat. The prison was full of them. He closed his eyes. Scratch. This time it came again. Edmund rose slowly. His heart pounded. For years he had heard nothing except the sea, the wind, and the footsteps of guards. Now something was happening. He pressed his ear against the wall. Scratch? There it was. Someone was digging. A prisoner. A human being. For the first time in years, excitement surged through him. The next day he waited impatiently. When darkness arrived, the sound returned. Hour after hour it continued. Edmund whispered through the wall. Who's there? No answer. Only digging. The following night he tried again. Can you hear me? The scratching stopped. A silence followed. Then a faint voice answered, Who speaks? Edmund nearly collapsed with relief. A voice. An actual voice. My name is Edmond Dantes. There was a pause. Then the stranger replied, I am Abbe Fahia. For several minutes they exchanged questions through the stone. The old man had spent years trying to dig an escape tunnel. Unfortunately, he had miscalculated. Instead of reaching the outer wall, he had reached Edmund's cell. To Edmund, it felt like a miracle. For weeks they worked together. Using stolen tools and sharpened metal fragments, they widened the opening until a man could crawl through. The night the tunnel was completed, Edmund squeezed through the narrow passage. At the other end sat a thin old man with bright, intelligent eyes. Abbe Faria smiled. At last. Edmund could not stop staring. After 12 years alone, the sight of another human being felt almost unreal. The priest offered his hand. Welcome, my friend. From that night onward, everything changed. Faria possessed a brilliant mind. He spoke several languages. He understood mathematics, science, history, politics, and philosophy. Most importantly, he understood people. Night after night, the old priest taught Edmund. The prison became a school. The student learned eagerly, he studied languages, he learned strategy, he practiced memory exercises, he read books that Faria had recreated from memory. Years passed. The ignorant young sailor slowly transformed into an educated and disciplined man. One evening, while discussing the circumstances of Edmund's arrest, Faria suddenly became silent. His eyes narrowed. Tell me again, he said. Edmund repeated every detail. The anonymous letter, the accusations, the prosecutor, the arrest on the day of his wedding. When he finished, Faria nodded grimly. You were betrayed. I know. No, said Faria. You do not understand. The priest began analyzing each event carefully. One by one, he identified the men who had benefited from Edmund's downfall. Danglars wanted his position. Fernand wanted Mercedes. Others feared what Edmund knew. As the pieces came together, Edmund felt anger rising inside him. For years, he had believed himself the victim of terrible bad luck. Now he understood. His enemies had planned everything. His imprisonment had been deliberate. His life had been stolen. The realization burned like fire. I will make them pay, Edmund whispered. Faria studied him carefully. Revenge is dangerous. They destroyed me. Perhaps. They took everything. The old priest sighed. Then promise me one thing. What? Do not let hatred become your master. Edmund looked away. He could make no such promise. A few months later, tragedy struck. While they were working in the tunnel, Faria suddenly collapsed. His body shook violently. A stroke. The old man survived, but he was weakened. He could no longer move easily. From then on, Edmund cared for him. One night, sensing that his end was near, Faria called Edmund closer. "There is something you must know." The old priest revealed a secret he had guarded for decades. Hidden on the island of Monte Cristo was an enormous treasure: gold, jewels, fortunes beyond imagination. Faria described the exact location, every landmark, every measurement, every clue. At first, Edmund thought the story impossible, but the priest spoke with absolute certainty. As dawn approached, Faria grasped Edmund's hand. "You are the son I never had." Tears filled Edmund's eyes. The old man smiled weakly. "Use the treasure wisely." A few hours later, Abbe Faria died. Edmund remained beside the body for a long time. He had lost the only friend he had known in 12 years. The prison felt colder than ever. Yet as he sat in silence, another thought slowly formed. The guards would soon come for the corpse. And for the first time in many years, Edmund saw a path to freedom. The dead left Chateau d'If. The living remained behind. What if, he wondered, the prison made a mistake? The first rays of dawn had not yet reached the sea when Edmond Dantes heard footsteps approaching through the prison corridor. The guards were coming. They had come for Abbe Faria's body. Edmund sat beside his friend, his mind racing. For years, he and Faria had dreamed of escape. They had mapped tunnels, studied routines, and imagined countless possibilities. Now, suddenly, a desperate opportunity stood before him. The old priest was dead. His body would leave the prison, and perhaps Edmund could leave with it. His heart pounded as he dragged the priest's body gently from the burial sack that lay beside the bed. Tears filled his eyes. "Forgive me, my friend," he whispered. He placed Faria's body beneath his blanket and covered it carefully. Then he climbed into the rough canvas sack himself. The cloth smelled of salt, mold, and death. His hands trembled as he pulled the opening shut around him. Darkness swallowed him. A moment later, the cell door opened. The guards entered. One grumbled about the early hour, another laughed. Neither suspected anything. Edmund remained perfectly still. The men lifted the sack. His body lurched upward. Every muscle screamed to move, but he forced himself to remain motionless. They carried him through winding corridors. For the first time in 14 years, Edmund was outside his cell. Though he could see nothing, he sensed fresh air touching the cloth. The smell of the sea grew stronger. Freedom was close. Then something unexpected happened. The guards stopped. Edmund heard the sound of rope. A knot tightened around his legs. Fear exploded through him. Why were they tying him? Then he remembered. Prisoners buried at sea were weighted down with cannonballs. The realization hit him like lightning. If they threw him into the water, he would sink straight to the bottom. His plan was becoming a death sentence. Before he could react, the guards lifted the sack once more. One of them counted. 1. Another laughed. 2. A final voice shouted. 3. Suddenly, Edmund was flying through the air, then came impact. The freezing sea swallowed him whole. He plunged downward into darkness. The weight tied to his feet dragged him deeper and deeper. Water pressed against his body. His lungs burned. Panic threatened to overwhelm him. But years of suffering had forged extraordinary determination. Faria had taught him never to surrender. Edmund pulled a hidden knife from his clothing and began sawing frantically at the rope. The seconds felt endless. The pressure increased. His chest felt ready to burst. Finally, the rope snapped. The cannonball disappeared into the darkness below. Edmund kicked upward with all his remaining strength. Up, up, up. His lungs screamed. Black spots danced before his eyes. Then suddenly he broke through the surface. Air rushed into his chest. He gasped wildly while waves tossed him beneath the stormy sky. Behind him stood the massive walls of Chateau d'If. For 14 years, the fortress had been his world. Now it was only a distant silhouette. Edmund laughed, then cried. Then laughed again. He was free. The sea carried him far from the prison before a passing smuggler's ship discovered him. The sailors believed he had survived a shipwreck. Edmund carefully concealed the truth. Over the following months, he worked among them, learning their trade and waiting patiently for the right moment. All the while, one thought remained fixed in his mind: Monte Cristo, the treasure. If Faria had spoken the truth, everything would change. One evening, fate finally provided an opportunity. The smugglers anchored near the lonely island. The moment Edmund stepped ashore, excitement surged through him. The island was exactly as Faria had described. The cliffs, the caves, the hidden landmarks, everything matched. For 2 days, he searched. Nothing. On the third day, he found a narrow opening concealed behind rocks. His pulse quickened. Carrying a torch, he entered. The passage twisted deep into the earth. Dust covered the floor, no footprints, no signs of human presence. The cave ended at a stone wall. Edmund examined it carefully. Then he noticed a faint marking, a symbol, exactly as Faria had described. His hands shook. Using tools borrowed from the ship, he began breaking through the wall. Hour after exhausting hour passed. Finally, a large stone shifted. A hollow chamber appeared beyond. Edmund raised the torch. For a moment, he could not breathe. The room glittered. Gold coins filled chests. Jewels sparkled like captured stars. Silver bars were stacked in enormous piles. Crowns, necklaces, emeralds, rubies, diamonds. The treasure was real. More wealth than he had ever imagined lay before him. He fell to his knees. For years, he had known only hunger, darkness, and despair. Now, unimaginable fortune surrounded him. Faria had spoken the truth. Everything had changed. Yet as Edmund stared at the treasure, another realization slowly emerged. The gold represented more than wealth. It represented power. Represented power to travel, power to investigate, power to strike. The men who had destroyed his life were no longer beyond reach. Danglars, Fernand, the others. They believed Edmond Dantes had died years ago. They had grown rich and successful while he suffered in prison. But now a different man would return. A wiser man, a stronger man, a patient man, someone they would never recognize. Edmund filled a small bag with jewels and left the cave. Outside, the sun was setting over the sea. Golden light covered the island. For a long time, he stood silently watching the horizon. The innocent sailor who had entered Chateau d'If no longer existed. Prison had killed him. Betrayal had buried him. What emerged now was something entirely different. A man armed with intelligence, wealth, and purpose. A man who would spend years preparing. A man who would become known across Europe by another name. As darkness fell, Edmund looked toward the distant mainland. Somewhere beyond that horizon lived the men who had stolen his life. They felt safe. They felt victorious. They had no idea what was coming. Edmund closed his hand around a diamond taken from the treasure. His voice was calm. "Wait for me." The wind carried his words out across the sea, and the long revenge had finally begun. 10 years passed. The world had forgotten Edmond Dantes. The young sailor who had vanished into a prison cell was now believed dead by almost everyone who had known him. But Edmund had not spent those years hiding. He had spent them preparing. Using the treasure of Monte Cristo, he traveled across Europe. He studied finance, politics, law, and human nature. He built connections with nobles, merchants, bankers, and influential officials. Everywhere he went, he adopted new identities, learned new secrets, and gathered information. Most importantly, he watched his enemies. Danglars had become one of the wealthiest bankers in Paris. Fernand Mondego had become a respected military hero and nobleman. The men who had betrayed Edmund were living lives of luxury and honor. They believed their crimes were buried forever. Then one day, a mysterious nobleman arrived in Paris. He was known as the Count of Monte Cristo. No one knew where he came from. No one knew the source of his immense fortune. His mansion dazzled visitors. His knowledge amazed scholars. His wealth impressed even the richest aristocrats. Within weeks, all of Paris was talking about him. And exactly as Edmund had planned, his enemies became fascinated by the mysterious Count. They welcomed him into their circles. They invited him to their homes. They shared meals with him. They laughed with him. None of them recognized the man they had destroyed years ago. Edmund found this almost unbelievable. He could sit across the table from Fernand and discuss politics. He could shake Danglars' hand. He could look directly into their eyes. Yet they saw only a wealthy stranger, not the young sailor whose life they had stolen. Edmund never rushed. Patience had become his greatest weapon. First, he turned his attention to Danglars. The banker worshipped money above everything else. Greed ruled every decision he made. Edmund carefully manipulated financial opportunities around him. He encouraged Danglars to make increasingly risky investments. Each scheme appeared certain to succeed. Each opportunity seemed irresistible. Danglars invested heavily. Then, one by one, the investments collapsed. His fortune began to disappear. At first, he lost thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then millions. Panic spread through his business empire. Creditors demanded payment. Partners abandoned him. The wealthy banker who had once believed himself untouchable watched his empire crumble before his eyes. Within months, he was ruined. The man who had destroyed Edmund's future through greed was now destroyed by his own. Next came Fernand. This revenge required greater care. Fernand valued honor more than wealth. His reputation was everything. For years, he had built an image of courage and nobility. But beneath that image lay dark secrets. Through careful investigation, Edmund uncovered evidence of betrayal committed during Fernand's military career. The truth was devastating. Fernand's rise to power had been built on treachery. When the evidence became public, scandal erupted across Paris. The newspapers spread the story. Political allies abandoned him. Friends disappeared. His reputation collapsed overnight. Even worse, his wife and son learned the truth. The family he had spent years protecting could no longer respect him. The shame became unbearable. One morning, after losing everything he valued, Fernand took his own life. Edmund had imagined this moment many times during his years in prison. He expected satisfaction, victory, peace. Instead, he felt strangely empty. The revenge had succeeded. Yet the lost years remained lost. Mercedes was still gone. His youth was still gone. Nothing could change that. For the first time, Edmund began questioning the path he had chosen. A few days later, he visited Mercedes. Time had changed them both. The beautiful young woman he had loved was now older, carrying her own scars of suffering. When she looked into his eyes, she recognized him immediately. Not as the Count, as Edmund. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then tears filled her eyes. Edmund. Hearing his name from her lips after so many years struck him harder than any revenge. The anger he had carried for decades suddenly felt distant. Mercedes listened quietly as he spoke of prison, suffering, and vengeance. When he finished, she asked a simple question. Has it made you happy? Edmund could not answer, because he knew the truth. It had not. Justice had been necessary. The guilty deserved consequences. But revenge alone could not heal a wounded soul. That realization changed everything. Over the following months, Edmund used his wealth differently. Instead of destroying lives, he began helping people. He rescued families from poverty. He rewarded loyalty. He protected the innocent. Where once he had focused only on punishment, he now focused on mercy. For the first time since his imprisonment, he felt peace beginning to return. One evening, he stood aboard a ship preparing to leave France. The sun was setting over the sea. The same sea that had once carried him away from Chateau d'If. The same sea that had carried him to freedom. As the coastline faded into the distance, Edmund reflected on the extraordinary journey of his life. He had been betrayed, imprisoned, forgotten, then enriched beyond imagination. He had become both victim and avenger. Yet the greatest lesson had come at the very end. Hatred could sustain a man for a time, but it could never become the purpose of a life. As the ship sailed toward the horizon, Edmund looked out across the endless water. Ahead lay an uncertain future. But for the first time in many years, he welcomed it. The prison was gone. The revenge was finished. The past no longer controlled him. He carried only one final message from the friend who had changed his life long ago. The words of Abbé Faria, words that had guided him through darkness, suffering, and redemption. Wait and hope. And with that, the Count of Monte Cristo sailed into the unknown, finally free.